The town of Dalland was once a thriving community, bustling with life and laughter. This was the kind of place where children played freely in the streets, where neighbors knew each other by name, and where the sense of community was as palpable as the morning mist. Yet, in an unexpected turn of events, a deadly disease descended upon it, turning the once vibrant town into a desolate place. Dalland, a town that was once full of energy and hope, became the embodiment of despair. The disease was relentless, and its icy grip spread across the town like a wildfire in a dry forest. It was no respecter of persons, affecting both young and old, rich and poor. The townsfolk, once full of life, were now mere shadows of their former selves. Their laughter had been replaced with sobs, their smiles with furrowed brows. Amidst this turmoil, the population began to decline. The once bustling streets of Dalland were now filled with an eerie silence. Homes were abandoned, businesses shuttered, and schools emptied. The disease showed no signs of stopping, and the townsfolk were left with no choice but to flee their beloved town. Like a flock of scared birds, they took flight, leaving behind a ghost town. The desperation was palpable. The townsfolk were beside themselves with worry, their hearts heavy with fear and uncertainty. They were at a loss about what to do, how to stop the disease that was slowly eroding their town. The once thriving community was now on the brink of extinction, its future hanging by a thread. Dalland was a town in desperate straits. It was a place where hope was fading fast, where despair was becoming the norm, and where fear was the order of the day. But amidst this dire situation, an old man from Finland would soon come along with an advice that would change everything. Dalland was on the brink of extinction, its future hanging by a thread. In the midst of this despair, a glimmer of hope arrived in the form of an old man from Finland. This man, weathered by age and life, carried with him an aura of wisdom and knowledge beyond the comprehension of the desperate townsfolk. He spoke in hushed tones, his words echoing in the silent town square, proposing a solution as old as time itself, a sacrifice, turning to the age-old belief that an offering to the unseen forces could sway their wrath. The townsfolk decided to heed the old man's advice. After all, what did they have to lose? Their first act was to bury a rooster alive, a symbol of fertility and the dawn of new beginnings. The town watched in eerie silence as the bird's squawks were slowly muffled by the cold, unforgiving earth. Yet the disease persisted, unabated. Undeterred, they escalated their attempts. This time, a goat, an animal often associated with sacrifice, was chosen. The villagers watched as the innocent creature was forced into a hole, its bleats of protest growing fainter until they were silenced forever. But still, the disease continued its relentless onslaught. The townsfolk were at their wits' end. Their sacrifices had been in vain, and the disease continued to claim more lives each passing day. The old man's advice seemed nothing more than a cruel trick, a false beacon of hope in their darkest hour, yet they clung to his words, desperate and defeated. His cruel advice had led them down a path of guilt and remorse, but they felt they had no other choice. Their desperation blinded them to the horror of their actions. The fear of the unknown, the dread of the disease had driven them to commit acts of unspeakable cruelty. Yet, the disease remained a grim reminder of their failure. Hope was slipping away from the hands of the desperate townsfolk like sand through the fingers. The cruel advice of the old man had brought them nothing but guilt, despair, and an ever-growing list of the departed. In their desperation, the townsfolk made a chilling decision, a decision that would forever stain the history of Dalland. The villagers, consumed by fear and desperation, had reached a grim conclusion. The only sacrifice worthy enough to end the spread of the deadly disease had to be a human being. There, in the heart of Dalland, they set their sights on an innocent and orphaned boy. The townsfolk, driven by their own survival instincts, lured the unsuspecting child with the promise of bread, a simple yet effective bait for a young lad who knew the gnawing pain of hunger all too well. The boy, unaware of the town's dark intentions, fell into their trap. His small frame was dropped into a prepared hole, a pit that was to become his living tomb. The villagers, their faces etched with fear and desperation, picked up their shovels. They were about to commit an act so cruel it would send shivers down the spine of any who dared to speak of it. The boy, terrified, pleaded with the townsfolk. His cries for mercy echoed through the air, a haunting melody of despair and fear. Yet the villagers did not falter. They continued their grim task with a relentless determination, shoveling dirt onto the child. The boy's pleas grew weaker, muffled by the mounting soil above him. Yet the villagers did not stop. They could not stop. Their fear of the disease, their desperation for salvation had blinded them to the heinous act they were committing. And so the villagers of Dalland buried the boy alive, sacrificing him in the vain hope of ending the disease that was ravaging their town. The boy's terrified cries were silenced, replaced by the cold, unfeeling thuds of the shovels. His life was snuffed out, extinguished under a mound of dirt, a cruel testament to the town's desperation. The echoes of the boy's terrified cries were drowned out by the cold, unfeeling thuds of the shovels. And so the ultimate sacrifice was made, a dark chapter written in the history of Dalland. With the boy buried, the townsfolk waited for their salvation, but instead they were met with an eerie silence. The villagers, their hearts heavy with the weight of their actions, watched as the disease continued to ravage their town. The old man's advice had led them down a path of desperation and despair into the depths of an unthinkable act. The days passed into weeks, and the disease showed no signs of abating. A chilling reality dawned upon them. Their cruel sacrifice had been in vain. Regret gnawed at their souls, remorse filled their hearts, yet the worst was yet to come. For from the boy's grave there came a sound that froze their blood, a soft, haunting cry that echoed through the silent nights. The villagers were left with a chilling reminder of their desperate act, a ghostly lament that served as a constant, mournful reminder of their folly. The town of Dalland was left to face the consequences of their desperate actions, haunted by the innocent cries that echoed through the cold, silent nights.